Hi, my name is Vincent Tharaud from Reset Revolution. Today I'm with Leah Malamed, and I'll be leading an interview about mental health and the impact it has on our bodies. Hi, Leah.
Hi guys, my name is Leah. Just to quickly introduce myself, I'm 17 years old. I'm in 11th grade. I'm a high school student living in Paris. And one subject that I'm particularly very, very passionate about is mental health because I think we all somehow struggle with mental health in our own ways. And it's something that has definitely had a huge impact on my life. And I feel like I'm the type of person, if you don't know my more personal side of things, you won't really realize when you first meet me that I have some of these quote unquote issues. And so that's why I'm here today, because I think that it's like mental health is something that we doesn't have enough awareness, and that's kind of like undermined or like kind of forgotten in today's society. So thank you, Vincent, for having me, and I hope this can help a lot of people kind of feel more comfortable with themselves and how to reach for help.
Great. Thank you so much for being here and talking about it with us. So maybe if we could start with a question, it could be, how did you first notice that your mental health was having a real impact in your daily life?
So as a child, I was always, very, 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 very happy. In my old school, I got severely bullied by not only students but teachers as well. But like when you're a child, that you don't really notice those things because you're kind of like stuck in your bubble. So I remember, even though like I wasn't invited to birthday parties, or teachers would call me dumb, I kind of just be like, oh, whatever, and just still go to school with the same smile that I always did. I remember like it was the smallest walking to school with my dad and my dog in the morning, just like that just made my day. And like thinking back now, I'm kind of like, those were like the worst years of my life, but at the same time the best, because I was so like not disconnected, but just like living in my own bubble and so happy, with myself. Um, that like even though like the society around me wasn't very nice to me, I didn't really notice. So I actually wouldn't say that like my mental health started to take a turn when I was little, but more as I was maturing and noticing things. And I want to say that it started to become really bad, I want to say in eighth grade, um, because during like my whole like first part of my like childhood and early adolescence, was seen as like a disgusting girl. Like nobody would want to like like just hang out with me. Like people were kind of like, whatever. And I remember I made it on like the ugliest girl lists like a few times. And I just remember in like eighth grade, just like I had this group of friends, but it was like really toxic. So not only was I in like a toxic group, but I was also, guys were just like making fun of me, and then like in my class just being like, I'm sorry, like Leah, you're like not one of the prettiest girls in the class or whatnot. And like I started to become, like really self-conscious about it. And I remember like even in sixth and seventh grade, I was pretty like really contented with myself. But it really started like as I was maturing and wanted to like like become like more whatever, like popular or what. Like I hate that term because again, like what is popularity? It's nothing. But like it's definitely something that we all pay attention to at a certain point in our like life. And popularity was a big thing at my old school. And so I started becoming really hard on myself in ninth grade. And so like that's when eighth grade. So like end of eighth grade, I want to say like middle to end of eighth grade was when I started to notice that, things were like rough. I was crying a lot about like, things like my appearance, and, crying a lot because I was like mad at my friends hurt me, even though like what they were doing like isn't that big of a deal. But it's like I just blew everything out of proportion. And I remember that very same year I asked to change schools to my parents, because I like was like, oh, like if this continues, like it can only get worse at this point.
Yeah.
My parents like, you have good grades, like why change schools? Like the school likes you. And I'm like, that's not the issue. It's not the school liking me, it's me liking the school. And so they were kind of like, no, like never said no, but they were just kind of like they didn't really understand why, which is also understandable, because like from a point of view from a parent, like if your child is doing well in the school, then why change?
Yeah.
And so that's kind of like when I started noticing that like things were gonna take a turn, but I didn't know like how big the turn was. I just thought like I was gonna, go into 9th grade, get a new class, and like that's it, like come back from summer and just, be like a new Leah, like new friends, like just forget like that 8th grade like was in the past. But then little did I know that just made it worse, because like even though you say you changed, like you haven't. The like issues and the insecurities you've had before, it's not because you push them away or you change your appearance that you necessarily change everything that's like wrong or like you're insecure about inside.
Yeah, definitely. High schoolers and even primary students really are cruel between each other.
I would say that kids are meaner though. I think that we like forget that, but from like what I remember and like what I see, I think kids are horrible. Like people think they're so cute, but since they have no filter,
yeah, exactly,
they're only really they're meaner actually. So like, but I think that high school, like again, it's in proportion. Like I doubt that in like elementary school you'll have a hot and not list, So it's just kind of just like it's like everything is like in proportion.
Yeah, it's You grew up and somehow find new ways to. Yeah. So do you know or are able to identify I don't know what caused or a trigger to all these issues?
Well, I want to say I think it's a lot of my bullying and, like just like people being just like really, 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 like not mean, but just like not the nicest with, like things that I was already insecure about. Like not only students, but like teachers as well. And so like I kind of grew with this like insecurity. And so like now when people are like, oh yeah, like I love your outfit, or like I love this, I love that, I'm just kind of like, yeah, but it's kind of like goes over my head, because like I still am so implemented with like the same like values I had when I was a kid. Like, oh yeah, you like it's not like you'll never be enough, but like you know what I mean? Like you're not like what we're looking for, kind of. So like now when I feel like when somebody compliments me, I don't actually take it, Like, but when somebody criticizes me, that's a whole different story. Instead of just ignoring it, it like burns. And I'm kind of like, wow, So like what's really funny or like paradoxical or like ironic is that when somebody compliments me, which is positive, like I just like kind of ignore. But when somebody criticizes me, it's a whole turmoil of emotions.
Yeah, I think in general, we as humans, if I may say, tend to remember the negative more than the positive, but it must have been exacerbated by your experience in a way.
Exactly. And so I just like I think that I was just again like very insecure with myself when I was little, and like when I started realizing that when you're like in a courtyard and like nobody wants to play with you, like it's like it's fine, but then like you do realize that there's something wrong.
Yeah, exactly. You do realize that you're lonely in front of other kids actually socializing.
You're like you realize you're lonely, but like the difference like outside of school, like you don't really care, but still. So like I remember like me being like, oh, it's not possible for me to have friends like at a certain point. Like it's just I'll always be like alone. So like when I first started making friends, I was like, oh my god, this is so cool, But for example, I was like, are you sure that they like me? you know, because that's kind of like, oh, are they going to just walk out like other people have walked out or things like that. So, so again, it's like, I think that that's kind of like some of my issues. And that's again, something that I'm like working on is like trusting people and just like, you know, realizing that like, you know, like all your friends don't need to be put in the same box. Like you'll have like your party friends and you'll have like your study friends. Then you'll have like, you know, your like more seriously like emotional, you know, friends where you go into like really deep conversations. And I think that like that's something I'm definitely like don't know how to do is like separate all of them. Or like so sometimes like with my party friends, like I'll go into like really deep conversations when like they don't care. Like that's not like what they're into, you know? Or like, you know, like that's just like an example, but like in general. And so since I'm somebody I give a lot for my friendships and like I genuinely love people and I'm somebody who I give a lot and expect nothing in return, which is good and bad because the amount of, you know, like bad things that can also happen from giving a lot to people is probably as bad as not wanting to give anything at all. And so I just have a difficulty, you know, like realizing who's trustworthy and who's not because I kind of accept everybody with open arms and like, oh yeah, like we should do this, we should do that. But in reality, like maybe something, you know, like really bad is hidden inside of them.
So, wow, I don't really know what to say. It's you wouldn't really expect, you know, primary school to be that hurtful. So, what were the consequences? Like, what happened to you when it started? You know, really.
Well, the first thing that flagged, you know, like kind of my whole thing is I started to have really bad body dysmorphia. So I kind of was like, oh, if I like lose weight, you know, and get like skinnier and skinnier and skinnier, like people will appreciate me more. I had really bad dysmorphia, and I remember in all of 8th grade, I thought I was fat when like I'm literally like, you know, somebody who's genetically very, very thin. Like my whole family is very, very, very thin. So I started having really bad body dysmorphia, but not necessarily like changing the way I ate. And then that lasted for, I want to say, like until end of 9th grade. So I had really bad body dysmorphia and really bad anxiety. But like still my anxiety was like manageable. And then end of 9th grade, I developed a really bad case of anorexia nervosa. And I dropped like 10 kilos in like, I lost 5 kilos in 2 weeks and dropped 10 more and dropped 5 more by like the end of summer, I think. And like for my height, I weighed like 40 kilos for like 1 year, 75. So I was severely underweight. And that's when my parents started to realize that something was wrong, or the people around me started to realize that something is wrong, because what's kind of like not the good part of anorexia, because there is no good part, but the advantage of that sickness is that the cry for help is more like noticeable, even though you're not crying for help, because you are losing so much weight. And at a certain point, when you look skinny, you look tired. I remember the best moment of my day was going to bed at 7 p.m. because my body was so exhausted from eating like one apple a day. And like at a certain point, like one of my food rules, because anorexia is just like you create a lot of food rules and then like they just increase with time. Like a certain point, it was like you can't eat hot for dinner because hot is like synonym of like a good meal. And then there's when it was like you can only ingest liquids.
Wow. Okay.
So like that's like when things really like started to like take a turn. And so that's when my, you know, parents started to, you know, bring me to like therapy. And like I definitely started to have like, you know, an anorexia recovery, and like the anorexia, like my recovery for that lasted like, I want to say a good 6 months. You know, like I had a halter on my heart because I remember like my heart wasn't functioning properly, and you know, like that's the issue with anorexia, that like it's not only the mental part, it's also the physical part, because your body is so weakened that you have to go to like, you know, like cardiologists and then like gynecologists to make sure that you're still fertile and things like that. So, you know, it was like a lot of doctor's appointments, and I was really, really lucky because my old school was very supportive on me with that, like very, very, very supportive, you know, kind of like we had to manage my schedule around that, and they're like, no problem. You know, my principal also helped me, you know, like I had appointments with her. She'd even call me during, like, for example, confinement to see how I was doing. So I had a really close relationship with my principal, and that really helped me as well, kind of like stabilize like my anxiety and my recovery. But it's definitely like something that took a lot of effort, and by going through therapy, you realize a lot of like what goes around your eating disorder and why your eating disorder developed. And so like now that that's gone, you have to face the other part of the other mental health disorders that were anorexia just covered. And so that's when we started discovering all of the other things that were like under the packet, and, you know, which is still like body dysmorphia, and like, you know, I had really bad like clinical depression over the break, and then, you know, school phobia, and just a lot of things, PTSD, and just like a lot of disorders that just like keep on like, you know, kind of being like spat out on your like to your face, and then like anxiety. And so as I was getting more and more into my recovery, like again, the other disorders kind of just like, you know, went up and up and up and up. And so I think that, you know, like I've also been like, I've learned great life lessons through all of my, you know, kind of like recoveries, and like discovering, you know, like kind of like my mental health and like how I function. But also, you know, like the cost was, you know, cost, like it was an expensive cost. And I remember one of my friends once asked me, she's like, Leah, like, are you happy like with, like, she's like, not are you happy, are you glad with like all of the things like you just went through, and like and continuing going through, because like at the end it's a great outcome, like you could become so much wiser. And I was like, yes, I'm really happy with like the outcome, but then on the other hand, like I wouldn't want to go through that level of pain, like intense pain. So yeah, that's pretty much like everything I have to say about like, you know, like what triggered it, like what I had. And like right now I'm currently dealing with high anxiety. So I had to like stabilize things like that. But, you know, again, like it's a work in progress. It's not something that goes away, you know, in a year, and it might take like 5 years for it to go away. But already, like, I'm really proud of myself, because I feel like I've pushed through. And there was a certain point where like I was scared to leave my apartment because I was scared of people, you know, like, you know, just being mean to me. And like that was like a couple of months ago. So now the fact that I can just like even like go to school, like that just is, you know, like somebody completely different. And like one of my closest friends was I was on the phone with her, and then she goes to me, like, by just like listening to your vocals like this summer, and like now, like you're a completely different person. Like your voice just used to be so broken, and now you're like, you know, all cheery and stuff. Like again, like there are ups and downs, like everything. But she was like, it's super impressive. And that's something that really marked me, because I've never thought about it like in those lights. Like I never thought about like what I like gone through and like what I've achieved, and more of like what's still there. You know what I mean? Like, oh my God, I still have really bad anxiety. Like I'm sick and tired of this, instead of like changing your mindset and being like, oh yeah, but like look what I've, you know, like gone through. It's kind of like seeing the glass like half, you know, like half empty instead of seeing it half full.
Yeah. Yeah, that must have been a real hit to realize that you overcame it, at least a part of it. So, Leah, if I may ask, what do you think was the hardest part of all of it?
So, actually, I know this is gonna sound really ironic, but the hardest part of everything I went through is not having, I don't know how to make like this, like to phrase this, but like not like being kind of alone in the whole, you know, process.
Mm,
Because I think that just like a lot of people get really scared when they see, you know, like somebody like that's not doing too well, and so then, you know, therefore they like, you know, walk out of my life, and like I don't really like blame anybody for like not wanting to like be friends with me or not wanting to do that. Like that's entirely their decision, you know, for like whatever reason. But for me, the most hurtful part of it is like feeling like it's basically, you know, like a lot of people like let go of me and like having to deal with this all alone and not telling these people that they've caused me an undescribable amount of pain. Because the whole point is I didn't want to use my friends as therapists, yet they were hurting me. So I think it was kind of like a vicious cycle.
mhm,
And some of them, in the moment, they didn't realize it.
mm,
And I think that that was a huge life lesson for me because some of my friends came back and some of them, you know, owned up to what they did and apologized. And I think that like that proves that our friendship was stronger and like went through it. But like some other people, like it felt like they just didn't care. And so I think that the hardest part was just like, you know, feeling like you had like no purpose in the world and like having to go through everything in your head like alone. Like at a certain point, I didn't even want to reach out to my doctors because I was scared to bother them.
wow.
And
Okay.
so, you know, it was summer. Like my therapist just thought that like I was having the time of my life when I was like, it was the complete opposite of that.
Mm,
And so I want to say that, you know, what's hurtful is that there, I feel like there's some type of like, again, like I think mental health is something that is very undermined, even though you try to explain to somebody, you know, like what's going on, like nobody will fully understand. Because again, like even though you try to explain to your parents like what's going on, like they'll try to understand the best that they can. But if you haven't gone through something similar, then you can't understand it. Even if you've gone through something similar, you haven't gone through the exact same thing because nobody has the exact same, you know, like journey when it comes to like mental health or suffers from the exact same thing, even though it's globally the same thing. It's not like pinpoint down to the same thing. And like feeling, sometimes you just feel so alone. And but like that feeling of like emptiness, it's kind of like as if you were like in outer space and just like falling. Like that's like the best way I could describe like the feeling I felt this summer. And I felt like I was in like a dark room, like just like and just falling, but like nonstop and just alone, like having kind of nothing to save you. Like you don't see the light at the end of the tunnel, like it's just black and you just fall. And you feel so alone. And I remember just like you look for your purpose, but you just don't see it. Yet you're too scared to reach out to people because you're scared to bother them.
mm,
So that for me was like the hardest part. And you know, like I think it's also like just accepting that you also have issues. You know, but like just knowing that that's not because you have issues that you're not a great person.
mm. So did swapping school help with this feeling of loneliness?
I think that changing schools changed my whole life. So it was
Mm,
like a bunch of things that, you know, I think built up. And I am somebody again, like I live in Paris, but I'm still very, very American, and I'm very, very true to my American roots. And again, I'm the type of person, I don't do well in groups. Like I can't, that's why I have friends from like everywhere, every different friend group, because I like to have people that are different from me. And I was really sick and tired of the lack of diversity in my old school, which was already very diverse. Like it was very diverse, like a French school, but then for example, like more than half the people were just French from Paris. You know, and like some people were diverse, but like it's not as diverse as my new school. And just hearing like the incredible stories, and like everybody has a different journey, everybody has lived in different places, and just knowing that like I don't have to hide my like American side, and I can just be very, very open about like and stay true to who I am. I think that just like completely changed me and made me so much more comfortable with myself and accepting. So instead of like changing myself for others, like I just adapted, or like found like my kind of like, you know, area and place where I'm more comfortable in. And I'm very happy. I think it's definitely, you know, like it's made my mental health so much better, and I've gained so much more confidence, and not even just confidence, but just like pleasure in life, you know. And like I enjoy going to school again, and I enjoy just like being like having a quote unquote like normal life, like going out with friends on weekends instead of just like crying or like running home, or you know, like having like a normal level of anxiety for homework, you know. And it's just so like refreshing, but then at the same time, like as you're going to school, like you're not just like at your house and like not doing anything, because I was homeschooled at the beginning of the year, and like that was, I think, it was the best thing for me in that scenario. But like I wouldn't want to do it again, because again, it's like it kind of just feeds into the like sickness as well. And so I think that changing schools was the best thing for me. I'm so happy just like, you know, with myself. And then again, like there are issues everywhere. Like I'll still get triggered, you know, like even at my new school. And that's why I'm saying, but the difference between now and then is like I don't go around the problem and I face it. So when I'm triggered, instead of like trying to interrogate the anxiety through like an eating disorder, or like, you know, having the urge to like hurt yourself or something, you're more like, okay, I'm anxious, I'm triggered, accept it, let the anxiety out. Because in the long run, it's so much better for your, like, it's not better for your body, but it's better for like, in the long run, it's better to just externalize it, have a panic attack. It's like over time, those panic attacks will lessen, and you'll know how to manage them, and you'll know how to stop them, than to like interrogate and hurt your body in a different way by like starving it, or by overfeeding it if you have like bulimia, or by making yourself throw up, or over exercising, or just any of those things, or even cutting yourself. Mm-hmm. So even though like panic attacks are a huge toll on your body and they're exhausting, it's quote unquote better for your body than like all of those other things in the long
run. Okay, well, so you mentioned different cultures, especially the lack of diversity. Does this mean you observe different ways, depending on different cultures, to deal with these issues? And
yeah, so I definitely think that mental health in France is kind of downgraded, because, for example, the French education system, you will never, ever, ever find any school psychiatrist on campus. And it's kind of like, I remember, because my dad is French, and we were talking about this, and he kind of goes to me when I was in school when I was little, is like, you have issues, you talk to your dog.
Yeah. Yeah, that's unfortunately very true.
Exactly. And like, you're in school to work to get good grades, and like we don't care about like what's, you know, like not
at what cost. Yeah.
Exactly. For some people that works, but for me, who's somebody who's very emotional and already like just like American and kind of used like that American way, I needed people to be like more aware of like what was going on like behind the scenes, because it's great to get like a 20 out of 20 on a paper. It's great to get like, you know, like a 6 or 100%. But, you know, it's also important to take into account what's going on at home.
Yeah.
Because if, you know, like, you, for example, if you just lost your mom or something, like you're probably not gonna, you know, like you're mentally not stable enough to, you know, like reach for that top goal. And that's very, very important. I think that's what's super undermined in France, is that they just, it's not that they don't care, but they don't really care that much about what's going on in the kids' personal like lives. They just want the academics, and like that's it for them. But like for me, that's not it. Like school is a whole environment. And because like I'm talking about school in general, because at this age that's kind of like what's, you know, like the biggest, the most dominant.
Mm-hmm.
But like I know that in the States, like they have like mental health days, or they have things like that to just kind of like, you know, help, like groups, you know, like support groups. Like you don't really have that here, you know.
Yeah.
And they always have like a counselor to make sure you're okay, or they, you know, they really follow their students one by one, make sure they know everything like that's going on, or like not necessarily everything, but everything they need to know, you know, academically and, you know, like personally. Like they just, in the States, like I'm talking about like the States and that because I just know that from personal experience. The States, they're very, very focused on student well-being. And I think that's also something that I missed in my old school, like moving to Paris, is, you know, like I needed, you know, people to know that it's more than like just the grade. You know, there's like a bunch of different things. And it was like the lack of support, and just like it's kind of like in a school, you're like, instead of it being just like one for one, it's kind of like we're all in this together. And that's kind of like what I missed. That's definitely the two big differences also, like mental health in like France and the US, and also like my mom's American and my dad's French. So I can definitely see like both point of views. And it's very, very interesting because like I think the French also they don't understand it as much, because, you know, like they're kind of like built up in this like, I don't know how to say, like carapace or like blanket, or like in kind of this like box,
this shell,
and then it's exactly a shell. And then so therefore, you know, like mental health is kind of like this really weird subject for them. Yeah, I'm speaking very generally, like again, it just depends on the people. So yeah, I think that changing schools, and definitely like what I've seen is that you know, like it honestly just comes down to the person. Because like I'm technically French and I technically care about mental health, you know, so it comes down to the person. But still, in general, I feel like it's, you are born in society and you are born into culture, and like we all know that culture does define some part of you. And so that's why I think that anyways, it's definitely like, especially French versus US, because that's kind of like where I live through. US is much more accepting when it comes to
yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that must be a huge difference. Maybe even confusing sometimes. So in the end, how do you manage to cope with all of it? Like, what helped you the most?
So I want to say, this is gonna sound really, you know, like again, ironic, but for everybody who's struggling with mental health, I think the best way, and like, because everybody knows they have mental health issues down there when you do, but it's just to accept it and accept that you need help. Because going around it and being in denial, and I remember like I was so mad at my parents when they first told me that they, you know, like booked a doctor's appointment, to the point where I was like, I'm not going. And, you know, my parents were like, okay, like they were going shopping, and then they ended up bringing me there, you know, like, and I just refused to talk to the person the first time. And then, you know, she basically, you know, told me, listen, your parents are spending a lot of money. This is not like on this. And she was even like, it isn't about the money. Like, we don't care. But just know that they wouldn't be doing this for fun. And she's like, we just want, you know, your health and your well-being. And so it's kind of like, it's like, I remember her just looking at me and just being like, Leah, like, what the heck are you doing to yourself? Because being in denial, she was very blunt, like in a good way. She
Yeah.
was like, if you didn't need help, you wouldn't be here. But like, if you walk out of here again, like, how do you think this is going to end for you? Because there's only, at this point, I was very anorexic. She's like, there's only 2 ways that you finish in anorexia. You either continue being anorexic and you die, because it's the number 1 most deadly mental illness, because again, you're like so emaciated, nothing works, or you recover and you accept the help. She's like, if you want the first option, walk out. But if you want the second option, and which I think you should just fight for your survival and just fight for yourself. She's like, if you care about yourself that much, because again, like, anorexia is the thin ideal. If you care about being like the thin ideal, accept the help. Because she's like, if not, you won't live to be your thin ideal. And it was kind of like, those were words that really hit me. And then that's when I started talking, and that's when I started opening up, and that's when I started like accepting and like, like listening to my doctors and realizing like at some point I'd get into fights with my, like therapist, psychiatrist. And then at the end, I'm like, one of my best friends who's actually like, she stuck with me during this whole time, and probably the only person that has stuck with me, since the very beginning. And like, again, without her, like, I probably wouldn't be here today, because she's the only person that's made me feel like somebody actually cared about me when I felt like nobody did. And she, basically told me, I'm sorry, like, Leah, your doctors know better than you on this point. Because I started going, like, I know myself. She's like, that's the whole point, is like, you don't. When you're in an illness, your illness tells you what you should be. Because when, for example, with your mental illness like anorexia was my best friend, because you feel so good in that sickness, because you're like in control, and you feel that you're so good. And like, that was one of the hardest things, like getting over my eating disorder, is like I felt like I lost my best friend. And then like, and I couldn't pinpoint it that like that she was more of like an enemy than a friend. You feel so good in like your sickness, and you don't realize you realize what you're doing, but you're not like as conscious. And so again, like, the best way I coped with it is accepting it and listening to my doctors, and just having that one person. You don't need thousands of friends. You just need that one good person, or those few really good people that helped you, that understand you, and that support you. And once you found like your true friends and the ones that will be there for life, everything just falls into place. And so it was just having good people around me, and like, again, changing schools, and like more like gaining confidence and accepting. And just, again, like, just really listening to your doctors. And if you don't have doctors, then again, that's like a different story, trying to like understand more about yourself, and just like, instead of being in denial, just accept. And that like mindset change was like a whole different way for me. But then again, like, there are ups and downs, but that's the best way I could cope with it. And I think that that's something that, again, for me, the whole point of this interview as well, like last topic, but like the whole point of this interview is, I feel like a lot of people, again, are in denial and don't want to speak up. And like, that's not right, because and I know that some people, like, to this day, like even right now, are searching for their purpose and feel like they're not. But like, I can know this from like personal experience. Even though you have nobody in your life, even though you feel like there's nothing, you're always something to someone. Even if it's your hairdresser, there's always something to someone. You're always something to someone, and you're always valuable, even though you feel like there's no light at the end of the tunnel. And more like, we'll get out of this, and don't be afraid to get help, because that's what it's there for. If not, why would suicide hotlines be there? mental health retreats or things like that. It's because a lot of people need it, and a lot more than you actually need. And sometimes it's not because somebody looks happy on the outside that they're happy in the inside. And so that's, I think that like the whole raising awareness is something that we need to be so much more supportive. And I think it also, like, it just stems with society. And like now a lot of people, like even I sometimes joke and like, I get like, like sometimes when you wake up and you're like, oh, that's like, it was depressing, or like, oh, I'm so depressed, like things like that, or like jokingly, or like, oh my God, like let's jump out the window together, like after you get like a bad grade and things like that. And so there are a lot of like jokes like that I think that people, like just say like that, but then they don't realize the like depth or like the depth of it and how like profound it is. Like I'm still like a bit like I sometimes do that, like we all do. But I think that's also why mental health can be very, very undermined now. It's because it's often like turned into like kind of that joking way. So yeah, that's pretty much like everything I have to say about like the subject and all. And like again, if you're struggling, just know you're not alone, and know that you shouldn't be afraid to reach out. And even if you feel like you have nobody, there'll always be that one person that cares for you. If it's family, friends, your dog, like whatever. And even that, if your doctors care for you. And that's something that I've learned over the past, that they're not just there, for themselves, they're there for you. And so there'll always be a support group or somebody in this world, because there's nothing more precious than life. And like I've learned that the hard way, and everybody should come out with the same, like output without the level of pain. So that's kind of like the whole point of like this interview, is just to say that you shouldn't be afraid to get help. And like, again, like you're so loved, and there's like a whole, support behind everybody, even though you feel like you're alone. So yeah.
Wow. I can only thank you for being so open about it. And yeah, thank you so much for sharing.
It's something that was hard for me to accept. And I'm finally at a place right now where I'm just like, listen, like this is me. Like this is me, and this is the reality of life. Like life isn't always just like, going on vacation and going to the beach and, like doing all that fun stuff and sipping on coconuts and things. No, it's like, it's also the really harsh reality of life that's often very undermined. And I think that like that's not fair to today's society, when we should all be holding hands instead of like squashing each other into like box or categories.
Wow. Thank you so much, Leah, for coming here today and talking so openly about it. I learned so much, and I hope everyone did as well.
Well, thank you so much for having me also. And again, like the whole point of this was to, raise awareness and people to know that they're not alone, and they are so loved, and that they shouldn't be afraid to get help. So thank you for interviewing me. It means so much. And yeah.
Thank you so much. Goodbye.
Bye.